Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this part two of our COVIDSafe legal webinars, series 2 of 4 of the COVIDSafe community events. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here at the law firm Kaizen Synergy, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session is a bit of a hands-on session. We're more than happy to take questions that you might have as we go through the webinar. We have also flagged a number of questions that people have already come back to us on over the last few days, particularly around opening up for community events and what are some of the challenges that they are facing. Before we start, we do actually acknowledge we have with us or joining us as part of our guests a number of agencies from the police, the ambulance services, and other essential service workers as well too. And we do pay our respects to the services that they have been providing, especially over the last 12 months, and acknowledge their work as well too, especially in the frontline services. That said, we are looking at community events, and as the lockdown restrictions ease, agencies across the country are looking at effective ways of actually opening up and providing community-based services as part of their core works. With that, we also focus on Aboriginal agencies as well too, and we'll discuss some of the challenges that they've seen, and also look at real-life case studies that will impact, and we can actually learn from other agencies as well too. That said, we do pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners. So let's have a look at today's agenda. We will be working through the A to Z checklists and the legals around community events. We're going to look at what a COVID-safe event looks like. What do you need to think about? What do you need to do and when? What are some of the other agencies doing around the country, and what does this actually look like? We're going to look at, is there a difference between running an event from a group of 1 or 2, 5, 10, right up to 10,000 or more people as well. And our law firm has actually advised agencies around the country across all of these different community events and styles as well. We're also going to look at some of the updated COVID-safe rules and what is generally required, and also more than happy to answer any questions as we go through this. And some of these is really about where do I actually start from. So when we look at community events, a lot of agencies are starting to scratch their head around where do we start. There's obviously industry plans that agencies have, some agencies have looked at, but agencies that provide some types of events look at this and go, well, they don't quite fit to what we are actually doing. There's also pandemic plans, state pandemic plans. There's checklists that departments give. There's the talk of QR codes, registration reports as well too, and attendance reports that you're needing to keep as well. There's safe work guidelines. This is just a few examples of some of the documents that are actually out there. And that said, it's no doubt that there are a lot of questions that come out of all of this. Some of the questions that we've been asked when we circulated our attendee invitations was asking people to come back to us on what are some of the questions that you might want answered today. Some of those questions that came back that we will cover include how long do I need to keep the sign-in form of those that visit a facility or an event? What are the majority doing around QR code scanning? A lot of people are using this, but again, how long does this need to go on for? Where do I start with community events? So what is the first step if I want to organize a community event? What checklist should I be using? Do I have to jump directly into some of these industry plans that are, I've seen some are 46 to 56 odd pages long? Do I have to do that every time I do a community event? There are questions on vaccination registers now. Who is covered by this? Do we need to keep those for community events? Do we need to give those to volunteers to make sure that before we run a community event, who is actually vaccinated? There are some questions even from insurance companies that have provided directions by insurance companies to agencies like yourselves to say, if we're going to insure this event, then we need to have sanitizer stations at the entrance. But that then opens up other questions around, well, what does that look like? Do I need to keep other attendance registers? Do we go back to the insurance companies because a sanitizer station may not be viable for your event? There's also questions on policy and stallholder attendance forms, as well as liability issues as well too. So what happens if we run an event and either we need to cancel it because of a statewide lockdown, because we hear that state and territory governments will continue to use rolling lockdown measures as part of their toolbox in the event that changes do occur. And there is some concern about the increasing pandemic levels if the hotel quarantine systems open up, which in some states, for example, like Victoria, were found to actually result in a number of lockdown measures over the past while. So there is some quite general questions that agencies are looking at, and these are some of the questions that you've asked us for. We're going to look at covering these off in the webinar and discuss them and unpack some of these as we go through it. Now, that said, one of the things we will refer to is this dashboard, which is called the Gemma 360 COVIDSafe dashboard. It's a dashboard that all our supported agencies have been using. We've rolled out some 2,000 of these. It is a web-based dashboard that our law firm provides, and we will walk you through this part of it. You will all get access to the demo version if you don't already use it as well. But essentially, it covers off your industry plans. It gives you your checklists. It provides the policies, procedures, contact tracing space to run your QR coding. It gives you the QR codes for your different sites, all in one dashboard for your agency to use. With that, there is a licensing cost around this, which we will circulate out to all attendees today as part of the session as well. But we're finding a lot of agencies are using this dashboard simply because it puts it into context and makes it simple and easy, and everything's in one spot for you to manage. Now, that said, attending this webinar, what are you going to get out of this? Well, essentially, we want to give you three things. One is a timely collection of resources that you can start to use this afternoon. That includes information for your agency or company, your staff, your volunteers, your clients that you provide services to, and also get a knowledge and insight into what other agencies are doing and what is actually working for them. And let's actually unpack what that actually looks like. We're going to use a number of case examples throughout this to actually show you what has worked, and in particular focus on some agencies that have actually had to go through changes and were classified as hotspot regions and how they responded to that. A couple of slides just around our background and who we are. Kaizen Synergy is a law firm based in Victoria, but we provide services right across the country, all the way across to Western Australia, up through to Northern Territory, down across Tassie, and in Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, and South Australia as well too, covering all parts of the country. The Gemma 360 dashboard is a web-based compliance system that was actually designed some 10 years ago. I actually set it up as a quality and compliance system, and now it provides services across literally thousands of agencies right across from NDIS or Disability Service Agency, aged care, emergency service agencies, community health, education, pretty much every community service agency around, that's represented today around the country. A few housekeeping items that I will also mention. This webinar is being recorded all the way up to the question and answer part of the session, where we open up the phone lines and also chat lines, and will stay online until all questions are answered. You can ask questions throughout the webinar today, and you can do that via the chat group as well too, or the questions panel. And if you like, we can certainly get to you as we go through the session today. All materials referred to will be circulated today. That includes the recording of the webinar, which is also published on our YouTube channel, which we have done since the start of the pandemic. We also will post information on our website, which is our Kaizen Synergy website. You can see that here, and you would have visited that at some stage. We do have our public YouTube channel, which basically has all our past webinars dating right back to the start of the pandemic. When I say starting off the pandemic, back to February 2020. And when we almost started running these webinars weekly to keep people up to date as well. When you get your login details to your Gemma 360 COVIDSafe webinar, you will have a link that you can click on. It will take you to this blue button here, and your username and password will be provided to you in the email sent out later this afternoon as well. If you do have any questions, you can always contact us directly. Here's our information here, including our 1300 360 360 number, and my mobile is also listed here, which we have made public since the start of these sessions last year. Just by way of brief introduction, because we have a large number of agencies joining us today, we have onboarded since COVID over 2,000 companies to support them as part of their COVIDSafe plan, and also support them in running their COVIDSafe events, whether that has been in the past AGM, individual services directly to clients' homes, or larger events like the big breakfasts that have been organised, some of them organised around the country. In terms of recognition, we have been doing this work, compliance in pandemic and disaster work, since 2000, where we have actually delivered presentations and had peer-reviewed journals of our work back to the Dubai International and Emergency and Disaster Conferences, as well as receiving public-private partnerships from universities, and also Aboriginal community services work for going beyond the call of duty, all of which we are very proud to say. That said, our Gemma 360 COVIDSafe platform is being used by literally thousands of agencies all around the country to guide them through and support them through this pandemic as well. It is mobile, so it means that you can actually access it off your mobile device as well, and you can participate when we look at QR codes and how this works for yourselves as well. So let's have a look at the running a community event. What are we looking at here? Well, essentially, when we talk of community events, especially for community-based organisations, community events could be large community events where we're talking of hundreds of people, thousands of people. If you're running major events, 20, 30,000 people, or group classes could be a community event as well too, or smaller client visits as well too. So there are some broad classifications on what a community event actually is. And we're going to drill down into some of these, well, all of them, but look at some of the checklists that you need to look at for client visits versus group classes and community events. And what are some of the legal areas that are common to both? What are some of the things that you need to think about in terms of organizing these? And essentially looking at it from an event organizer's perspective to ensure compliance with approved COVIDSafe industry plans. And like many agencies have spoken to us about, where they've said, yeah, the industry plans are a good guiding document, but when we look at the services that we actually deliver, they don't quite fit. So what do we actually need to do there? You will see that in some states and territories, and we've just listed 3 here, this is not to exclude others, but just to say that, for example, if you're based, let's say in ACT, there's the COVIDSafe event protocol. If you're based in Queensland, there's the COVIDSafe events Queensland industry plan, and Victoria also has its a different, what we call a public attestation, event attestation document, and also a plan that the department has put up. So agent says that while there's a lot of documents out there, people are just really confused around what to actually look at. What we are going to do is unpack these and look at what is sort of a workflow for your agency to do. We're going to look at some of the theory around this in these slides, but in saying that, also give it to you back in a dashboard that will basically workflow it automatically for you in terms of what you need to do and when. And of course, that's based on where your agency is. So the small public gatherings, any decision to hold an event during the COVID pandemic, no matter how large or small, should rely on what they're calling a risk-based approach. The WHO has provided guidance on how such a risk-based approach can be taken. These include things like professional gatherings and events like birthday parties, football games, family occasions, those types of things. Cancelling a planned event is an option that should always be considered, especially in case of non-essential events or when precautions cannot be implemented or adequately communicated. And this is something that we put up some time ago. So essentially, for small public gatherings, and we'd say direct client services, where you're visiting people in smaller groups, is one of those. So there are essentially a number of key things. One is look for the local regulations before attending the event, stay at home if feeling unwell, and always comply with the following 3 basic preventive measures. One is around having social distancing, wear a mask if you cannot guarantee this distance. If you cover, sneeze, or cough, use a tissue, bent elbow, and immediately dispose of it, and wash your hands frequently. And that's really been one of the standalone points that we've seen with agencies. Now, that said, one of the legal pathways that we've found are actually very, very useful is this. So essentially, and we'll come back to these and walk you through them. And what happens here is that we look at, is the event covered by a COVIDSafe plan approved by the Chief Health Officer? And this is where I said there are a number of different COVID plans out there around it. What we have done on Gemma is basically input, depending on where your agency is located. So if you're running a special night disco, for example, in Victoria, then you will have the relevant Victorian plan automatically inserted into your dashboard. And likewise in New South Wales, Queensland, and the likes. So essentially, is there a plan that the Chief Health Officer has provided? Is it publicly available? Is there site-specific plans that agencies might have? And that's where we start with. Now, if it is a no, then look at whether your event is an indoor or outdoor event and calculate the maximum number of patronage at any given event. And this is what essentially our legal checklist is when we work with agencies exactly like yourselves to go through this. Now, from there, if it's no, then can the event comply with the minimum requirements per square meter and physical distancing, which we'll go through? If the event is no, then that's when you have to delay or postpone the event until government restrictions have changed. However, if you answer yes to it, then you're starting to flow down the right-hand side of the sheet. And this is where you can then start to look at, well, this is the process that I'm going to follow. The issue that we find, though, with this is where the law overlaps with other compliance obligations that agencies need to think about. So this is a good public health response, and we took this from the Queensland Industry Plan. But where people get confused on, and it causes challenges, is around issues of consent, privacy, work health and safety, as well as their general reporting and surveillance. And what I mean by that is, well, where does things like your registration process fit in? How long do I need to keep this documentation that I might have? who do I need to consult around running and operating some of these plans? So essentially, when we've advised agencies over the last 12 months, especially in the COVID space, when looking at events, is who is your stakeholder group? Do you need to bring in together people that are going to be running your events? So you might have contractors, or if you might have stall owners or the likes. So this is where you need to start to bring in and have working groups around some of those types of major events that you might be running. Equally, if you are running other services, such as working in partnership with other agencies around group classes, again, having this model that actually extends out to other service agencies is where you need to start to look at. And that on its own has raised some privacy issues, because people are saying, well, I'm sharing information about my clients, or I might share information about their clients back to me, which I don't really want to know. So there are some areas which we will cover off around this, and there are some areas which I will identify as we go through this webinar that you might need to carefully consider. And one of those is actually around vaccinations now. So people are actually asking, do we need to supply or have vaccination registers when we run these events? So if we have a volunteer support group that is actually working alongside our agency, not with our agency, but alongside our agency, is it we have to have all of those registers kept for everyone that's providing volunteer support services? Where does that actually fit in? And is there privacy issues that come out of this? So essentially, part of the pathway that we're looking at is attendees, the registration forms, the sign-in and notification. Now, one of the big areas that we will be looking at around this is around QR codes. And the QR codes that we can see actually is listed here. And one of the areas that we find is this area that is causing confusion. So essentially the process of the QR code, and I'll just do this as a bit of an introduction, replaces or works together with your attendance register. The attendance register that I'm showing you at the top is actually used by an agency called CMI. CMI International Ministries, Creation Ministries International, is works that we've done with them, and essentially they have an event and workplace register, and I acknowledge the work that we've done with Sonia Evans out there. Sonia actually is responsible for the event and workplace attendance register right across Australia. They have different groups that they run. So part of that was actually having events where they will actually have volunteers that run certain events in each different state and territory. Now, what they've found that works well at the moment is, because of the size, is to actually have an event register that they maintain. And it also means that because of some of the people that might attend don't have mobile phones or have challenges using the phones itself, then again, they need to keep registers of who's actually attended. And for that reason, it's worked for them to use that. Now, in terms of community events and also looking at registers, QR codes, two agencies that we're just going to talk about here is Rumballara Aboriginal Cooperative and also Women's Housing Limited. And I do acknowledge Laurie Seville, the Chief Operating Officer at Rumballara, and also Judy Line, the Chief Executive Officer at Women's Housing, and also Lena Tompkinson, the Compliance and Executive Assistant, and Lindy Parker, the Operations Manager at Women's Housing. Now, these two agencies do, in the past, use attendance registers similar to this, where people have actually either attended sites, and attendance registers has been one of the key instruments and toolbox that they've used. What they are moving on, and what they have used very well, is QR codes. Now, essentially QR codes, and I'm going to start talking about different parts of community events and bring these together for you as we go through it. And you can, if you like, for a better word, play along with me as well. So when we look at it, the QR codes are there. And when people talk of QR codes, what they're talking about is effectively using your mobile phone to actually check in. When we also speak of QR codes, what we find is that it's got to meet these 4 requirements. It's got to be fast and user friendly. You as an agency need to be able to contact trace and see who's actually attended. And we recommend that from a work health and safety point of view. Now, with a number of departments, and we're working actually with the Victorian State Department at the moment around actually integrating QR codes that Gemma system uses as well, and a lot of other providers are doing different things as well. And with it, it's got to be functionally user friendly for your agency. And it means that you need to be able to do it not just from a public health and point of view, but also from a work health and safety point of view as well. Now, what does this actually look like and how does this actually work? You'll see this is particularly important when we look at workflows for community events. Now, essentially what it does, and it should speed up the process for running your attendance registers. Now, how this works is quite simple, and yourselves can actually do this along with me as well. And we'll actually see how this works in live format for you. So essentially what I'm going to do is actually share my mobile for yourselves to view on the screen. And this is for us to actually view to see how this actually works. So let me just slide my phone over the top here and it'll come into view. Here we are here. Okay, so yes, you can see the photos that I've got on my phone as well too. It's live, and this photo has been used since the start when we've been running these sessions. So essentially what I'm going to do is this. And I'm going to take a photo. I'm going to bring my camera up and take a photo of the screen in front of me. And here it is. I've just let it open. I'm going to click on the camera icon and my screen comes up. Now, all I'm going to do is hold it up to actually see where the QR code is. Yourselves can do the same thing. And what comes up is this form on my phone. And yourselves can do exactly the same thing. Now, what I'm going to do is simply complete this. Now, what it does do is ask for my name. It's going to ask for my phone number. I will add here that if you are doing this with me as well too at your end, then when we come to the screen, if you want to create your false name or a name that hides everything as well too, excuse me, that's my wife calling. And with it, I'll just go to voicemail because I'm in a webinar with yourselves. Yes, this is all live. And I click on answering the questions. Do you have any of the following? Fever, shortness of breath. These are all the COVIDSafe symptoms that you can see here. And what we've done is actually bundled these questions together. Why we've done that is that if you answer yes to one of these, then you're answering yes to all of them essentially. And what I mean by that is if I have one of these symptoms, then essentially that's a trigger for the department notifications. Now, in this case, I'm going to say no. Now, reason for visiting the property, I'm just going to say test event, okay? But you can write anything you like. Any other comments? Now, the reason that we have any other comments here is that if I tick yes, now I could have shortness of breath, for example. Now, it might be that I've got shortness of breath and I can say, because I have just walked upstairs, okay, and I'm unfit. So with it, it gives me the option to actually say why or adjust why I might have answered no or yes to that as well. Now, the difference here is that what I'm going to do is simply click on submit. Now, once I submit this form, you can see that I've got the information And this is just a test form that Women's Housing have allowed us to use. And essentially what I've got is thank you for doing your part to keep us all COVID safe. And it's from, in this case, Lindy Parker, Operations Manager at Women's Housing. And so that's what I've done to complete my form and my check-in. Now, what does that mean for me? Well, what it means is this. Let's say I was with Women's Housing as an agency. Now, I can actually go to their dashboard and actually log in and have a look to see what responses I have got. And in this case, if I go in, and I'll just bring this up, I can see that I've got a number of responses already provided, what the dates were, when they did it, and what I have here. And I've got all of this information that's listed as part of that process. So within it, what I can see is who's answered what. I can go in and actually have a look at individual responses as well too. And I can actually automatically see, here we are here, the response that I've actually received. Now, the same thing works, and what we've done with other groups to give you a really clear example about this is that if we log in, and this will be the real part for your agencies to look at, is there's an agency called Balrano Local Aboriginal Land Council. It is a smaller agency, but they do incredibly important work. And what they've done is use the same form setup of what Women's Housing have done. But the difference is that their contact tracing button is that it records the events that they have on here. And so within it, they can actually go back. These are some of our test forms that we've got. They can click on the contact tracing view, and they can bring up that information that they need at any point in time. It automatically registers the date and the time that it was done as well too. And you can see we've got this information here. And again, this is logged in from the contact tracing button. So they use the QR code itself for their meetings, for their board meetings. If their staff travel out to events as well too, to run group classes for local council, local Aboriginal council meetings, then again, they can actually check in to these, to this process. And it's the same process that they're doing for their contact tracing. And I can't stress that enough. So whether you're running a small community event or a large community event, the workflow is actually the same in terms of how this actually works. And it makes it very, very quick and easy to manage. Now, the part of this that I'll just unpack around this is that with the QR codes, what they have done, and we've actually recommended this to some RSL around the country as well, where you can actually place these QR codes at key check-in points as well. So if you're running these events, what they've done, and Women's Housing is an example of this, where they actually put on the QR code and they used a letterhead to then basically place this out into key parts of their sites that they wanted to manage. And again, it worked where they could then check in. Now, one of the things I will mention around this, and important parts, is that there are some QR code systems that actually will allow people to check in, but you don't actually see the check-in information. So from a work health and safety point of view, while you might be needing to do it from a public health legal point of view, as in, yes, you have a check-in code that you can have and then people check in, that's great. But you need, from a work health and safety point of view, if you're looking at the legislation there, to ensure that your community event is safe and that you meet your responsibilities for your agency as well. So essentially what you do need to make sure that you have is access to your contact tracing data to make sure that people are actually doing it. So we know that there are agencies where they've actually had to make sure that staff and volunteers are actually checking in and not just taking a photo of it and not checking in, or alternatively, not doing it at all. So it's important that you be able to do that as well. Now, the other important part for your agency to look at is what this department agencies have called staff attestation. And it's just really a fancy name to say that staff need to make sure and volunteers to make sure that when you're running not only community events but services, that in key areas for especially essential services and community-based service events, that you actually get people to affirm that they don't have any symptoms and that they have met their requirements, and that you keep this information as well. So one of the forms that's really, really important to actually do is that any people that are involved directly in managing and organizing and running an event for you actually complete what we call a COVID assessment form. And you'll see these around we've seen them in Victoria, for example, and I'll just use that as an example, where they've asked staff to actually complete a daily attestation form for some of the work that they do. And this is no different for your agency, especially when running an event. And some of the questions are quite different. It's not just around, do you have any of these symptoms? And in this case, we have actually marked it as where they do need to go in and actually verify step by step all of these as well. And also tick in, have they been in close contact with a confirmed case? Now, depending on where your agency is based, this form that you can see in front of you will actually link to your own chief medical officer's directives and locations as well. So, for example, if you're based in Victoria, then this form will have a link here that says cases and allocations, and this will list the exposure sites for that particular state and region. And it means then that you've got that direct link, should anything change, that you are kept up to date. And the important part is once it's done, it automatically records the date and the time that the staff member has actually completed this form. So for your community events, when you're looking at these things and looking at some of the other obligations around it, it's not just about completing a COVID safe industry plan. It's about having your check-in systems in place. It's about having people complete attestation forms to say that they're COVID safe, and you being able to record this information in. And this gives you some of the forms that you need to look at. And we've brought these all together for you quite simply. So that way you've got your COVID safe plan, you've got your safe work guidelines, you've got your assessment forms that you have, as well as your cleaning registers, and importantly, your Board of Governance reporting. And that's something the Board of Governance reporting is something that we're going to look at in part 4 of this webinar series. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I actually just say that you can run off a report. So when you look at the plans around this and we say, right, what do we need to look at in terms of the plans? Well, essentially, depending on where you're sitting and what type of event, there's a whole number of plans that you can use. And most people will start with looking at it from here. What we've actually suggested is to go back just one step. Otherwise, it can get confusing very, very quickly. Now, each workplace should have its own COVID safe plan in place. And this was something that Scott Morrison put up last year, Prime Minister Scott Morrison put up last year. The COVID, when you're looking at the COVID plans itself for your event and community event, what we have said to agencies is, before we do that, let's have a look at what the legislation says. Let's have a look at what the safe work checklists are. And once we do that, we'll be able to get a self-assessment. And this is where some agencies that are running shows, for example, have looked at the industry plans and going, well, this doesn't really apply to us here. It's a massive document and a massive parcel of work, but how do we know what actually applies? And what we've said is your own COVID safe plan should actually include some of the events, not the other way around. So what we have set up for you around this is to eventually take your safe work guidelines, your legal obligations around your distancing and some of the rules around this is around making sure that you maintain your common rules around COVID safety, and that is around social distancing and the number of people coming together. What to think about? Well, we can divide these really into about 6 different points for you. The first one is around the state laws. Does our current rules allow the event that I'm looking to plan to happen? Obviously, if no, then that will change it for you again. If it's yes, then what do you do from there? Now, does the venue itself have a COVID-safe plan in its relevant industry space? So if you are running an event, why not have a look at, well, does the other venue have its own COVID-safe plan? And that is something that you can actually adopt into your event and community event space. Then you're looking at what services am I running? Am I running a blue light service? Am I running a health program? Am I running something for people with a disability or aged care? What is my audience and what services am I running? Then looking at, can I maintain the rules of workplace health and safety and the venue capacity? And this is where some of the insurance areas actually come into it, because looking at setting up sanitizing stations or whether PPE equipment is required, whether I do need to maintain a register of volunteers and their vaccination registers as well too, especially for people of different age groups around that? Or can another agency, for privacy reasons, give me that validation that I need, that they do have a register in the event that it's called on? So those are the sorts of things that are generally looked at as you go through. And of course, as you then look at this, what are the other COVID-safe plan checklists that aren't covered maybe by the venue or the other community service? If that's the case, then looking at the register of attendees and COVID-safe checks for attendees, as I showed you, using something like the QR code that we've given you as well too. So other things to think about are what come out of safe work. And some of these ones are around physical distancing, health and hygiene checklists, and we'll circulate all of this material around for you today as well too, as well as cleaning. And you'll find that these are consistent across all the industry plans that have been developed as well. In terms of the registers as well, what you'll find is that the registers themselves do allow you to have these attendance registers in place to manage people coming in and out of the service. But that said, what we do find is that the QR codes allow, especially for large gatherings, for it to happen very, very quickly. And I can see on the questions panel, agencies asking us, can I have multiple QR codes all around different spots for my event, for multiple entrances? Yes, you can. Depending on how you've want it set up, you can have QR code, the same QR code at different entry points. Or if it's a very, very large venue, you can have different QR codes to actually monitor individual entrances, if you like, as well. And that is certainly something that you can do. We have just another question on that to say, can we within the event actually have site-specific QR codes as well? You can, and certainly where it is a large gathering, like a use of, for example, showgrounds and large major events that you actually wanted to ask people to participate in tracking, then you can do that as well. And that is something that we actually do recommend that people do as part of this process. The other part that I will mention again is around having a look at the Gemma 360 COVIDSafe dashboard, because you do have your HR registers, you've got your policy templates that we've COVIDSafe plans, and also pandemic plan forms as well too that you can access. And it is important for yourselves to actually follow these things through. Now, some of the recommendations that we do make around this before we finish up and open up the phone lines is this. Certainly look at the COVIDSafe dashboard. It'll make things a lot easier for you to run community events. We do have options that are available for you to use. And when we say that we have divided up the COVID projects under projects, you will see that you've got the step 1, step 2, step 3, and there are also events checklists in there. And what this allows you to do is to actually step through each of the items that's relevant to your event. So whether it's a small, medium, or large type of event and what we call major event, then that is where we'll actually load those in for you as well. And you'll have access to these to use as template documents as well. The other part that we ask you to look at is look at the workflows, because part of this, as we mentioned throughout the session, is around the workflows of your community event and using the checklists that are in our slides that we have used. We use this when we advise other agencies across the country in terms of their community events. That is the same checklist that we use, and we'll work with them around it. The other one is identify and use your dashboard to manage your events. We've seen this across the board with other agencies over the last 12 months where they've had to swing in and out of rolling lockdowns, and it has been of assistance to them significantly in terms of documenting the information down. A few questions coming out of that. If you do have any questions after today's webinar or listening to this via the recording on our YouTube channel, then by all means, please reach out to us either on my direct mobile, which is listed here, our 1300 number, or our support desk email as well. If there are any questions, more than happy to stay on the line and answer any questions that people might have. We will stop the recording here and thank those that are going to leave us and say thank you for joining us today. And if you do have any questions, please contact us on 1300 360 360 or email us at support@gemba360.com.